Dead America, 23 Miles, Part 2, by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Riley crossed the clearing and stepped into the tree line without looking back. She wanted to. Every part of her wanted to turn around and take one more look at the house, at the window where Harper might be watching, at the place where her mother was lying in bed with a fever that could kill her. But she didn't. If she looked back now, she wasn't sure she would keep walking. The trees closed in around her, and the house disappeared behind her. The snow was falling in a steady curtain, thick flakes drifting down through the branches and settling on her jacket and the quiver strap across her shoulder. She adjusted the backpack, pulling the straps tighter so it wouldn't shift while she walked, and gripped the bow in her left hand. An arrow hung loosely against the string, ready to be drawn. The woods were quiet. The only sound was the crunch of her boots breaking through the top crust of the snow, and the soft hiss of flakes landing on the pine needles above her. She kept her eyes moving, scanning left to right and back again, checking the spaces between the tree trunks for anything that shouldn't be there. Walk, scan, listen. 2.5 months of doing this every single day had turned it into something her body did without being told. She walked north, following the general direction she had mapped out on the kitchen table with Harper. Pattison State Park was 10 miles away, give or take. In normal conditions, on a cleared road with dry ground, that was a long walk but manageable. Out here, pushing through snow that reached past her shins in places, weaving between trees, climbing over fallen logs and navigating terrain that had no trail to follow, 10 miles was a different thing entirely. She would have to pace herself. The first mile passed in silence. Nothing moved in the trees, no shapes between the trunks, no sounds besides her own breathing and the crunch of snow. The forest stretched out ahead of her in every direction, an endless grid of white and gray and dark brown bark. She kept herself oriented by checking the compass in her jacket pocket every few hundred yards, making sure the needle was still pointing her north. She thought about Harper, alone in that house with their mother, holding a shotgun she had only fired once in her life, and a makeshift spear made from a broom handle and a kitchen knife. Harper had killed 2 of those things while Riley was gone, lured them to the window, and put the blade through their skulls, just like Riley had shown her. She was tougher than she looked, but tough and safe were 2 different things. If the numbers kept climbing while Riley was gone, Harper would be on her own, with no backup and no way to call for help. Riley pushed the thoughts down. She couldn't help Harper from out here. The only thing she could do was keep moving, find the medicine, and get home as fast as possible. She had been walking for about 20 minutes when she heard it, a low moan somewhere off to her right. It was faint, muffled by the snow and the trees, but unmistakable. She stopped and crouched behind a thick pine, pressing her shoulder against the bark. She held her breath and listened. The moan came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of something moving through the snow. She peered around the trunk. About 30 yards to her right, a figure was moving between the trees. It was a man, tall, wearing a heavy winter coat that was torn at the shoulder, the insulation spilling out in dirty white tufts. His head was forward, chin against his chest, and his arms hung limp at his sides. One of his legs was dragging, the foot turned inward at a bad angle, plowing a shallow trench through the snow as he walked. Riley raised the bow and drew back the string. She settled the pin on the side of his head, tracking his movement as he shuffled between 2 young pines. 30 yards, no wind to worry about under the canopy. A clean line between the trees. She exhaled slowly and released. The arrow struck the zombie in the temple, and he dropped straight down, his knees buckling first, then the rest of him folding into the snow. He landed on his side without a sound. Riley waited. She counted to 30 in her head, listening for any response. The woods stayed quiet. She stood up and walked over to the body. She put her boot on the zombie's shoulder and gripped the arrow shaft. It came free with a quick pull, and she wiped the broadhead on the man's coat before sliding it back into the quiver. She was about to turn away when something caught her eye, a sheath on his belt. She knelt down and brushed the snow off his hip, exposing a leather sheath with a wooden handle sticking out of it. She unsnapped the strap and pulled the knife free. It was a hunting knife, the blade about 5 inches long, with a slight curve near the tip, and a full tang that she could feel through the handle. The edge was still sharp. She ran her thumb along it carefully and felt the bite. Whoever this man had been, he had taken care of his gear. She didn't have a knife. She had the bow, the arrows, and that was it. Having a blade on her belt changed things. It meant she didn't have to waste an arrow on every close encounter. It meant she had an option when drawing the bow wasn't possible. She slid the knife back into the sheath and threaded her belt through the loop, securing it on her left hip where she could reach it with her right hand. The weight felt good there. "Thank you," she said quietly to the body in the snow. She straightened up and started walking again. The compass confirmed her direction, and she tucked it back into her pocket. The snow was picking up. The flakes were thicker now, coming down in sheets that cut her visibility to maybe 50 yards on open ground, less where the trees crowded together. The wind had picked up too, pushing against her from the northwest, driving the snow into her face and finding every gap in her jacket. She pulled her collar up and tucked her chin down. The terrain was getting harder. The snow had drifted deep in the low spots between ridges, and in places she was pushing through drifts that reached her knees. Each step took effort, her boots punching through the crust, her legs working to pull free before taking the next one. She could feel the burn in her thighs and calves already. She shortened her stride, conserving what she could. Movement ahead, two shapes emerging from behind a stand of birch trees about 40 yards out. They were moving together, both slow, their bodies stiff and clumsy, arms hanging loose. The first one was a woman in a dark coat, her hair matted with ice and snow. The second was smaller, harder to make out through the falling snow, but moving with the same broken gait. Riley raised the bow, drew, and released in one smooth motion. The arrow hit the first zombie in the forehead, and the woman dropped backward into the snow. Riley already had the second arrow knocked by the time the first body hit the ground. The second zombie was turning toward the sound, its head swiveling, mouth opening to moan. Riley drew and put the arrow through its left eye. It went down sideways and lay still. She walked over and retrieved both arrows, wiping them clean, two at once, 40 yards out, and neither kill had been difficult. She was getting better with the bow. She would need to be. She pressed on. The snow continued to build, the wind pushing harder. The trees offered some protection, but in the gaps between thick stands of pine, the wind hit her full force, and she had to lean into it to keep her footing. Her face was numb, her fingers were stiff inside her gloves, and she flexed them around the bow grip to keep the blood moving. The miles passed slowly. Step, push, pull free, step again. The snow filled her footprints behind her almost as fast as she made them. In an hour, there would be no trace that she had come through here at all. She checked the compass again. Still north. She had covered maybe 4 or 5 miles from the house. She shifted the backpack and the quiver strap on her shoulders and kept moving. Another mile passed before she spotted it. A snowdrift had built up against the base of a large oak tree, the wind piling the snow into a mound that reached halfway up the trunk. It looked like every other drift she had passed, white, smooth, and shapeless. But the surface was disturbed near the bottom, a rough patch where the snow had been pushed around from underneath. Riley slowed her pace and angled toward the tree, keeping about 15 yards of distance. She watched the drift as she walked. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the snow shifted. A hand pushed through the surface, gray and bloated. The fingers curled into a claw. It reached out and scraped at the air before dropping back down and clawing at the snow around it. The moaning started a second later, low and guttural, coming from underneath the drift. The snow shifted again and a head emerged, the face caked with ice and frozen dirt, the mouth working open and shut. It was trying to pull itself free, its arms dragging through the packed snow, its body twisting and lurching as it fought against the weight pressing down on it. Riley didn't reach for the bow. The thing was half buried and barely mobile. She reached down to her left hip and pulled the hunting knife from its sheath. She walked forward, staying just outside the reach of its arms, and drove the blade down into the top of its skull. The knife punched through with less resistance than she expected, and the creature went limp. She held the handle for a moment, then pulled the blade free and wiped it on her pant leg. She looked down at the body. Something about the shape of it was off. She kicked at the snow around its midsection, clearing the drift away from its lower half. The snow fell away in chunks, and she saw it. Both legs were gone. One was severed above the knee, the other just below the hip. The stumps were old, the flesh dried and blackened, the bone visible where the tissue had pulled back from exposure and decay. Whatever had happened to this thing, It had been crawling on its arms for a long time before the snow buried it. "How far did you crawl?" she said quietly. She shook her head. "I don't want to know." She walked over to a fallen log about 20 yards from the drift and sat down. The bark was cold beneath her, but it felt good to take the weight off her legs. She pulled the backpack around to her lap and found one of the water bottles Harper had packed. She unscrewed the cap and took a long drink. The water was ice cold, but she needed it. Her father had always said that cold air pulled moisture out of the body faster than people realized, and by the time a person felt thirsty, they were already behind. She capped the bottle and slid it back into the pack. She sat for a minute, letting her legs rest, letting her breathing settle. The snow was still coming down hard, the forest disappearing into a white haze beyond 50 yards. Then she heard it, moaning. Not the low, solitary sound of a single zombie dragging itself through the snow. This was layered. Multiple voices, overlapping, rising and falling in a ragged chorus that drifted through the trees from somewhere ahead of her and to the left. Close enough to hear clearly, close enough to count individual voices if she concentrated. She stopped counting at 6. Riley stood up slowly, slinging the backpack over her shoulders and pulling the bow into her left hand. She set an arrow against the string and held it ready, her eyes locked on the direction the sound was coming from. The moaning continued, steady and constant, not growing louder, but not fading either. Whatever was out there, it wasn't moving toward her. Not yet. She stood beside the fallen log, listening, her breath rising in the thin clouds that the wind tore apart as soon as they formed. Chapter 2. Riley moved toward the sound. Every part of her brain was telling her to go the other way. 6 zombies was too many. 6 zombies in the open, with distance and clear sight lines. She could maybe handle if she had to. 6 zombies in dense woods, in deep snow, with the wind cutting her visibility down to nothing, was a different problem entirely. The smart move was to circle wide, put a half-mile of forest between herself and the group, and keep heading north. But the moaning was coming from the direction she needed to go. Circling wide meant adding miles to a trip that was already going to take every bit of daylight she had. It meant more time away from Harper, more time away from her mother. She didn't have miles to spare. She set her feet carefully, keeping her weight forward so the snow crust wouldn't crack louder than it had to. The bow stayed in her left hand, arrow nocked, string held at half draw. The hunting knife was on her left hip, where she could reach it in a hurry. She moved from tree to tree, pausing behind each trunk to scan the woods ahead before committing to the next stretch. The moaning grew louder. She couldn't see anything yet. The snow was falling heavy enough to turn everything beyond 30 yards into a white blur, but the sound told her enough. The group was spread out, not bunched together. Multiple voices coming from slightly different directions, layered and overlapping. She took another step forward. The hand came out of nowhere. A zombie stepped from behind a pine trunk less than 3 feet to her right, its arm already reaching. Riley had been looking ahead, watching for movement in the gaps between distant trees. She hadn't seen the shape pressed against the trunk, hadn't registered it as anything but more bark. Its fingers closed around her jacket sleeve and yanked. She went down. Her feet came out from under her, and she hit the snow on her back, the quiver digging into her shoulder, her weapon flying out of her grip. The zombie came down with her, its weight landing on her legs, its face inches from hers. Its mouth opened and a wave of sour, wet air washed over her face. Its teeth snapped at the air, missing her chin by an inch. Riley got her right arm between them and pushed. The creature was heavier than it looked. Its clothes were soaked through with melted snow and frozen blood, the weight dragging it down onto her. She shoved harder, getting her left arm up and pressing her palm flat against its forehead, forcing its head back. Its jaws kept working, teeth clacking together, a wet sound that made her stomach turn. Her right hand went to her hip. She pulled the knife free and brought it up fast. She didn't have the angle for a clean strike to the top of the skull. The creature was too close, pressing down on her, its face pinned just above hers by her left arm. She went for the temple instead, driving the blade in sideways with everything she had. The knife punched through bone, and the zombie went limp. Its full weight dropped onto her, and she felt the life go out of it, its arms flopping out, its head slumping forward against her palm. She held it there for a second, then twisted her body hard and rolled it off her into the snow. Riley scrambled to her feet, yanking the knife free as she came up. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She spun in a quick circle, knife out, looking for what else might be coming. The moaning had changed. The layered chorus had gotten louder and closer, the voices rising in response to the noise of the fight. She could see shapes now, moving between the trees, still far enough out that they were more outline than detail. 3 of them, maybe 4, spread across her field of view in a rough arc. They were coming toward her. Her bow was in the snow 3 feet away. The arrow that had been on the string now, buried somewhere in the drift. She lunged for the bow and came up with it, the grip familiar in her hand, then spun toward the quiver strap to pull a fresh arrow from over her shoulder. She set it against the string and drew. The closest zombie was about 20 yards out, pushing through a waist-high drift, its arms out in front of it like it was wading through water. She sighted on its head and released. The arrow hit it in the bridge of the nose and it went down, disappearing into the drift as it fell. 2 more behind it. She pulled another arrow and drew again, but the shape to her left was closer than she had realized. Maybe 15 yards. Her angle was wrong for that one, and the one straight ahead was closing too. She released on the closer target, aiming center mass of the head, and the arrow hit above the ear. The zombie dropped. She was already moving. She broke right, circling a cluster of young pines, putting the tree cover between herself and the ones still coming. A quick count in her head. 6 at the start, plus the one that had ambushed her. That was 7. She had put down 3. 4 left, and there was moaning coming from further out that sounded like it might be more than that. She planted her back against a thick oak and drew another arrow. She waited, listening. The moaning was getting closer, but not fast. The zombies couldn't see her now that she had moved, and they were tracking on sound alone. She held her breath. A zombie came around the left side of the oak, about 10 feet out. Riley pivoted and drew and released in one motion. The arrow punched through its eye socket and the creature dropped straight down into the snow. She moved again. She couldn't stay put. Standing still let them converge on her position, and she didn't have the arrows or the space to take them all from one spot. She pushed off the oak and ran in a low crouch toward a different cluster of trees, her boots punching through the snow, each step loud in her own ears. 2 zombies stepped out from between the pines directly in her path, 10 feet out. She didn't have time to draw. She dropped the bow into her left hand and pulled the knife with her right, not breaking stride. She went low. The lead zombie reached for her, and she dropped her shoulder, driving under its arm. She hit it in the midsection and felt it tip backward, the weight of the creature folding over her back. She kept going, letting its momentum carry it past her, the snow absorbing its fall behind her. The second one came at her from her left side. She spun and brought the knife up and across. The blade caught it across the face, opening a long gash from jaw to forehead. It didn't slow the zombie down. The thing couldn't feel pain. It kept coming. Riley stepped back, planted her foot, and drove the knife up through the soft tissue under its chin, angling the blade toward the brain. The creature shuddered and dropped. She pulled the knife free and turned to face the one she had knocked down. It was pushing itself up on its arms, back to its knees, head turning toward her. She didn't give it the chance. She stepped in and drove the blade down through the top of its skull. It collapsed forward into the snow and stayed there. Riley straightened up, breathing hard. Her arms were shaking. She could feel the cold sweat under her jacket, the wet clinging to her back. She spun in a circle, checking, counting, more moaning, closer. She looked up. Above her, the lower branches of the oak she had used for cover were thick and jagged, the wood broken and splintered, where a larger branch had snapped off at some point, leaving a spike of pale wood jutting out at chest height. The break was old, the exposed wood weathered, but the point was still sharp enough to matter. She moved toward it, backing into the space between the oak and a fallen log. The log would force anything coming at her to approach from the front, funneling the zombies into a narrow path. The broken branch was at her shoulder on the right side, angled outward like a spear. 2 more shapes came through the trees. One was larger than the others she had dealt with. A big man in torn flannel, his body bloated with decay despite the cold. The other was smaller, a woman, her jaw hanging loose where something had torn it at some point. They came into the funnel between the log and the oak, and Riley waited. The big one got there first. It pushed toward her, hands outstretched, its mass filling the space between the trees. Riley took one step back to bait it closer, then grabbed its wrist as it lunged. She pivoted hard, using its own momentum, and yanked the arm sideways toward the broken branch. The jagged wood punched through the zombie's coat and into its ribs. The thing kept trying to move forward, its legs still pushing, but the branch held. It was stuck, its torso pinned against the oak, its arms flailing at the air. Not dead, not yet. Brain still working, whatever that meant for something like this. But not going anywhere. The woman was right behind it. The pinned zombie was blocking the funnel now, its body filling the gap. The woman shoved against it from the other side, trying to push past, her arms reaching around her partner's shoulders. Riley stepped back, drew the knife, and went up on her toes. She brought the blade down through the top of the big one's skull, angling it forward so the tip would punch into the brain. The zombie sagged against the branch, dead weight now, still pinned. The woman kept pushing. The body of her partner was blocking her, and she was too weak to move it. She clawed over the top of it, her fingers scratching at the dead zombie's hair, her teeth snapping at Riley over the big one's shoulder. Riley pulled the knife free and stepped around to the side, giving herself a clean angle. She drove the blade into the woman's temple and watched her drop. She stepped back, breathing hard. She listened. The moaning had stopped. Riley stood there for a long moment, the knife in her hand, the bow still clutched in her left, her chest heaving. The snow kept falling, settling on the bodies at her feet, already starting to cover the blood spread out in the white around them. The woods were quiet again. She sank down onto one knee and let her head drop forward. Her legs were trembling. Her shoulder hurt from where the quiver had dug in when she hit the ground. She stayed there for a full minute, just breathing, letting her heart rate come down. Nothing was coming. Nothing was moving in the trees beyond the small clearing where the fight had happened. She pushed herself back to her feet. She walked the site slowly, retrieving arrows. 4 of them, scattered across the snow and buried in the bodies. She pulled each one free, wiped the broadhead, and slid it back into the quiver. One of the shafts was cracked near the tip from the impact, and she set it aside. 17 arrows down to 15 now, 1 unusable, another 2 unaccounted for, somewhere in the drifts where she couldn't find them. 14 then. 14 arrows to get her the rest of the way to Pattison. She wiped the hunting knife on a patch of clean snow, then on her pant leg, and slid it back into the sheath on her hip. The blade had earned its keep in the first hour. She didn't want to think about how the fight would have gone without it. Riley checked the compass, still oriented north. She adjusted the backpack, tightened the quiver strap, and started walking again. The forest was quieter than it had been before the fight, like the noise had burned through whatever was close enough to hear it, leaving a zone of silence in its wake. The snow continued to fall, thicker now, the light going gray as the afternoon pushed toward evening. She walked with the bow ready, an arrow on the string, her eyes moving constantly. She had covered maybe a quarter mile when she heard the next group. She stopped and crouched behind a stand of young pines, pressing her shoulder against the bark. The moaning was off to her right, maybe 100 yards out, and it was moving. The direction of the sound was shifting as she listened, drifting to the east. Whatever the group was, it was wandering away from her, heading deeper into the woods at a slight angle. Riley held still and let them go. She could see flickers of movement between the distant trees, gray shapes moving through the white, but nothing looked back in her direction. Whatever had drawn them was somewhere other than where she was, and as long as she stayed quiet, they would keep moving in the wrong direction for her. She waited until the moaning faded. 10 minutes, maybe more. She couldn't risk the movement until she was sure they were far enough off that a misplaced step or a cracking branch wouldn't pull them back. She watched her breath cloud in front of her face and counted the seconds, making herself stay patient even as the cold crept into her knees and fingers. When the sound was gone, she stood up slowly and stepped out from behind the pines. She checked the compass one more time before continuing on northward. Chapter 3. The light was going. Not dark yet, but the gray of the sky had deepened and the shadows between the trees had lost their edges, bleeding into each other as the sun dropped toward the western horizon. Riley couldn't see the sun through the overcast, but she could feel the day slipping. The temperature had dropped another few degrees in the last hour. Her breath was coming out in thicker clouds now, and the snow on her jacket had stopped melting against her body heat and started accumulating. She pulled the map from the inside pocket of her jacket and unfolded it carefully, keeping it shielded from the falling snow. She had been tracking landmarks as she walked, matching what she saw against the rough sketch her father had marked up years ago. A creek bed she had crossed about an hour back, a ridge with a cluster of dead oaks at the top. Both of them were on the map. She put her finger on her best estimate of her current position and traced the line north to where Pattison State Park was marked in pencil. 1.5 miles, maybe a little more. She folded the map and tucked it back into her jacket. She had been on the move for something like 5 hours, and the last 2 had been brutal. Her legs were heavy. The skin on her face felt raw from the wind. The pack on her shoulders seemed to gain weight with every mile, pulling her forward and down, making her fight to keep her posture straight. But 1.5 miles was close. 1.5 miles was nothing compared to what she had already covered. She kept walking. The woods ahead of her thinned slightly, the dense pine giving way to a mix of hardwoods and younger growth. The ground sloped up gently, and the snow on the higher ground wasn't as deep, the wind having pushed most of it down into the low spots. The walking got easier. Her pace picked up. A moan drifted through the trees ahead. Riley stopped and listened. Just the one. No layered voices, no overlapping sounds, just a single low groan from somewhere up the slope. She crouched behind a birch trunk and waited. The moan came again, weaker than the first, and then she saw it. A shape moving between the trees about 50 yards ahead, shuffling along the ridgeline with the same broken gait she had seen all day. She set the arrow against the string and drew back. The angle was uphill, which meant accounting for a slight rise in the trajectory. She held the draw for a second longer than usual, settling the pin a touch high on the zombie's head, and released. The arrow hit clean. The zombie dropped sideways into the snow and lay still. Riley walked up the slope and retrieved the arrow. This one was an older kill, the body already decayed, the clothes stiff with months of exposure. She wiped the broadhead and slid the arrow back into the quiver. She scanned the woods around her. Nothing else moving. She pressed on. She was over the ridge and starting down the far side when she saw the clearing. It was small, maybe 30 yards across, a natural gap in the trees where an old windfall had taken down several large pines at once. Snow covered the clearing in a smooth sheet, broken only by the shapes in the middle of it. A tent, set up against a fallen log for wind cover. A dark patch of ground next to it where a fire had been. A rough circle of stones around the fire, with a dusting of snow on top of the ash inside. Riley dropped into a crouch and studied the scene for a long moment. Nothing moved. No zombies, no survivors, no sign that anyone was here now. But someone had been recently. The tent was still pitched, not torn down by weather, and the snow on the fire ring was light, as if it had only been accumulating for a short time. She pulled an arrow to the string and moved forward, keeping low. She circled the clearing before approaching the tent, checking the trees on every side. Still nothing. The silence out here was different from the silence of the deep woods. It felt settled, like whatever had happened in this clearing had finished happening a while ago. She reached the tent and knelt beside the flap. It was unzipped, hanging open, the fabric stirring slightly in the wind. She pulled it back and looked inside. A sleeping bag unrolled, the fabric dark with blood along one side. Not a stain, a soaked patch, the blood having pooled and frozen, the color still dark red in the low light. The inside of the tent was spattered with more of it. Arcs of blood on the nylon walls where something had been flung or thrown. A small duffel bag sat at the foot of the sleeping bag, open, its contents dumped out on the floor. A flashlight, a pair of socks, a paperback book, the pages curled from the cold. Riley touched the edge of the blood patch with her gloved finger. It wasn't fully frozen. The surface was stiff, but when she pressed down, she felt give underneath. The blood was still wet in the center. Hours old, maybe less. Whatever had happened here had happened today. She backed out of the tent and stood up. She took a slow turn in place, eyes sweeping the tree line around the clearing, looking for any sign of where the person or the attacker had gone. Footprints would have told her something, but the snow had been falling steady for hours, and any tracks were buried by now. A moan rose up behind her. Riley spun around, bringing the bow up. The zombie was already closing the distance. It had come out of the trees on the far side of the clearing, and it was moving faster than anything she had seen all day. Not a shamble. An actual driven walk, its legs lifting high to clear the snow, its arms reaching forward. Its head was up. Its eyes were fixed on her. The clothes were fresh, a dark coat and hiking pants, boots still laced and intact. The blood on its chin told her everything. Riley's brain caught up fast, recently turned. The blood on the sleeping bag, the attack had happened today, and this was end result of it. The victim had come back quick, fresh enough that the muscles still worked. It was 20 feet out and closing. She drew and released on instinct, but the zombie was moving, its body rocking side to side as it pushed through the snow, and the shot went wide. The arrow disappeared into the drifts beyond it. She pulled another and knocked it, but the zombie was on her. 15 feet. 10. She dove right. Her shoulder hit the snow, and she rolled, coming up on one knee. The zombie had tried to track her and failed. It couldn't pivot that fast, not through the deep snow, and its momentum carried it forward past where she had been standing. It went straight into the tent. The nylon collapsed under its weight. The zombie's legs went out from under it as the tent fabric tangled around its feet, and it pitched forward, its upper body disappearing into the collapsed shelter. It thrashed, trying to stand, the tent wrapping tighter around its lower half. Only its legs were visible now, kicking against the snow. Riley had an arrow ready. She drew, sighted on the closest leg, and released. The arrow hit the thigh and buried halfway up the shaft. The zombie spasmed and kicked harder, but the leg didn't hold weight anymore. Something in the muscle had been severed. Its thrashing got more violent, the tent fabric tearing as it tried to free itself. Riley backed up. She had just gotten distance when she heard the other moans. 2 more voices coming from behind her, from the same direction as the fast one had come. She turned to face them. 2 shamblers emerging from the trees, slow, stiff, the way they were all supposed to be. They were about 40 yards out, pushing through the snow at the pace she was used to. She turned back to the fast one. It was working itself free of the tent now, tearing through the fabric with its hands, pulling its upper body out of the collapsed shelter. She pulled another arrow, drew, and put one into its other leg. The zombie's second leg gave out and it dropped sideways, its upper body flopping onto the snow, both legs now useless beneath it. Now, the shamblers. She turned and drew on the closer of the 2. She took a breath, let it out halfway, and released. The arrow caught the zombie in the forehead, and it dropped. The second one was still coming, maybe 30 yards now, close enough that she had a clean shot. She pulled another arrow, drew, and released. Headshot. Down. Riley turned back to the fast zombie. It had dragged itself out of the tent and was trying to push up on its arms. Both legs were ruined, the arrows still buried in the meat, but the rest of it was working fine. It clawed at the snow, pulling its body forward, its head snapping up to lock on her. It let out a sound that was nothing like the low moans of the shamblers. This one was sharper, faster, angry. It started dragging itself toward her. Riley took a step back. She watched it come, watched the way its hands dug into the snow, the way its torso twisted and whipped as it tried to propel itself forward. There was a violence to it that felt different from the others. The slow ones felt mechanical, empty. This thing felt like it wanted her, like it still had enough of whoever it used to be left to hate. Her hands were shaking. She pulled another arrow and fumbled with the nock, her fingers not finding the string right. She stopped. She forced herself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The zombie was still coming, dragging itself through the snow, its teeth snapping at the air, but it was slow now, limited by the ruined legs. It couldn't get to her. She had all the time she needed. She set the arrow properly against the string. She drew back. She sighted on the top of its skull as it clawed toward her, and she put the arrow straight down through the back of its head. The zombie went still. Its arms dropped. Its head slumped forward into the snow, and the sound it had been making cut off mid-growl. Riley stood there for a moment, the bow still in her hands, the string still humming faintly from the release. Her breath was coming in short clouds. She watched the body for a full 10 seconds, making sure nothing else was going to move, before she let the bow drop to her side. "You're okay," she said quietly. "You're okay." She walked over and pulled the arrows one at a time. The skull arrow came out cleanest. The two in the legs took more work, the shafts having gone deep into muscle and wedged against bone. She pulled them free, wiped them on the zombie's coat, and inspected them. Both broad heads were still seated. Both shafts were straight. She slid them into the quiver. She retrieved the other two arrows from the shambler kills, then went back to the collapsed tent. The fabric was torn open from the fight. She knelt and sorted through the spilled contents of the duffel bag. Most of it was useless to her. The flashlight had no batteries. The paperback book was ruined from the snow. But at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag, she found 2 protein bars. She checked the wrappers. Still sealed, still good. She tucked them into her backpack. She did another sweep of the clearing, checking for anything else she might use. A small folding knife under the sleeping bag, the blade dull but usable. She pocketed it. A half-empty water bottle, frozen solid. She left that one. There wasn't anything else worth carrying. Riley stood at the edge of the clearing and looked out at the woods to the north. The light had dropped another notch while she was working. The shadows between the trees were almost blue now, the kind of color that came right before dusk. She adjusted the backpack, checked the quiver, and started walking again. Her nerves were shot. The fast zombie had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She had gotten used to the slow ones, the predictable ones. Something that moved like that, with that much force and that much speed, was a different problem. She thought about how it would have played out if she hadn't dove at the right moment, if the tent hadn't been there to foul its legs. Her hand drifted to the knife on her hip, then to her bow. She kept checking, kept making sure everything was where it was supposed to be. She moved faster now, her head on a swivel, the arrow back on the string. The woods stayed quiet, the snow kept falling. She had been walking for maybe 20 minutes when she heard the gunshot. A single crack, far off, carrying through the trees from the north. The sound was flat and sharp, muffled by the falling snow and the distance, but unmistakable. She stopped in her tracks. A second shot, then a third. 3 shots in quick succession from somewhere ahead of her. The direction was right. The distance was right. A quarter mile out, maybe less. She pulled out the map and checked again, just to confirm what she already knew. Pattison State Park. Riley folded the map away and stood there for a long moment, listening to the echoes fade into the snow. Somebody was alive up there, or had been, a few seconds ago. Chapter 4. Riley moved through the woods with the bow up and an arrow on the string. The gunshots had stopped a few minutes after the first 3, and nothing had followed. No more shots, no shouts, no engine noise. Whatever had happened up ahead had happened fast, and now the woods had gone quiet again. That wasn't comforting. She had learned by now that silence after gunfire usually meant the shooter had either gotten what they wanted or stopped being a shooter. The snow had let up. The heavy flakes that had been falling all day were thinning out, and through the gaps in the canopy, she could see patches of dark sky above the trees. The sun was down. She hadn't noticed the exact moment it had slipped below the horizon, but the light had dropped past twilight and settled into full dark while she was working her way through the last stretch of forest. What little she could see was coming from a break in the overcast to the west, where a smear of pale clouds was letting through the first hint of moonlight. She reached the edge of a thick stand of pines and stopped. Ahead of her, through the trees, she could make out open ground, a clearing, bigger than the one where she had found the bloody tent. She could see shapes out there, dark masses against the lighter ground, but the distance and the low light made it hard to read the scene. Riley took a knee behind the pines, letting her breathing settle and let her eyes adjust. The longer she looked, the more detail pulled itself out of the dark. The clearing wasn't a clearing, it was a parking lot. She could see the straight lines of pavement buried under the snow, and around the edges of the lot, someone had pushed dozens of cars into a rough ring. SUVs, pickup trucks, sedans, all angled bumper to bumper in a loose barrier that closed off the perimeter of the camp. Not a perfect wall. There were gaps. But it was enough of a ring to slow anything that tried to come through. It hadn't worked. She could see movement inside the ring. slow shapes drifting between the cars and the shadows of whatever was set up in the middle of the lot. She couldn't tell how many from here. A lot. Enough that she could pick out separate shapes in a dozen different spots at once. A thick oak stood about 10 yards behind her, with branches low enough to climb. She slung the bow over her shoulder and got her hands on the lowest branch, pulling herself up. The bark was cold and slick with ice, but her gloves held. She climbed steadily, setting each boot against the branches, testing her weight before committing. She got herself about 10 feet up, high enough to see over the tops of the smaller trees between her and the lot, and wedged herself into the fork of two thick limbs. The clouds shifted as she settled in. A break opened up directly overhead, and a wash of pale moonlight spilled down across the parking lot, washing the snow in silver blue light and sharpening every shadow. The camp was bigger than she had expected. The parking lot was the main staging area, with the ring of cars around the outside, but inside the ring, she could see the layout of what had been a survivor camp. Tents were pitched in rough rows across the pavement. Some were still standing, their canvas walls sagging under the weight of accumulated snow. Others had collapsed or been knocked flat, the poles bent or broken, the fabric torn open. Backpacks and duffel bags lay scattered across the ground between the tents, along with piles of clothing, cooking gear, and what looked like the remains of a supply cache spilled across the snow. Somebody had gone through this place in a hurry, and the zombies. She started to count and gave up after 20. They were spread throughout the lot, some wandering in slow circles between the tents, some standing motionless, some pushing against the inside of the car barrier like they were trying to find a way out. All of them slow, all of them the same broken shambles she had been dealing with all day. The cloud shifted again. The moonlight drifted eastward across the lot, and as it moved, new details came into view. At the east side of the ring, between two pickup trucks, a gap opened up. Not an accidental gap, a deliberate one. The trucks had been positioned to leave a path between them, and the path led out of the lot and down into the trees on that side. Riley couldn't see where it went. The moonlight didn't reach that far, and the trees swallowed the path after 20 yards. But she could see zombies walking through it. A slow procession, maybe 2 or 3 at a time, drifting from somewhere deeper in the trees out through the gap and into the main lot. Or drifting the other way, from the lot down into the path. It was hard to tell which direction they were moving in without watching longer, but the movement was consistent. The path led somewhere, and that somewhere was pulling the dead back and forth. The gunshots had come from that direction. She was almost sure of it now. Riley made a rough map of the layout in her head. The main lot, the car barrier, the tents and gear scattered across the pavement, the path to the east. Wherever the shooter was, they were down that path. Whatever was left of the camp's supplies, if anything, would be scattered through the tents and the ground around them. Her best bet was to stay away from the path, work the west and north edges of the lot, where the zombie density looked lower, and scavenge what she could from the outer tents. She climbed down, lowering herself carefully, one branch at a time. Her boots hit the snow, and she crouched beside the trunk for a moment, listening. Nothing had changed. The moans of the zombies drifted across the lot in a low, constant chorus, but none of them had noticed her. She pulled the bow back into her left hand and moved forward. She worked her way through the last stretch of trees, staying low, keeping the car barrier between herself and the moonlight as much as she could. On the way, she stopped and picked up a handful of rocks from the base of a fallen log, turning them over in her palm, fist-sized, heavy, the kind that would make noise when they landed. She slid 4 of them into her jacket pocket. The nearest section of the car barrier was at the south edge of the lot, an old sedan, its front bumper pushed up against the back of a truck. Between them, where the curves of the 2 vehicles didn't quite meet, there was a gap about 2 feet wide. She could see into the lot through it. Riley knelt beside the rear tire of the sedan and put her eye to the gap. 2 tents stood close to the barrier, maybe 10 yards inside. One was a dome tent with the front flap hanging open. The other was a larger cabin-style tent with a rainfly that had ripped free and was flapping in the wind. Between them, a pile of backpacks and gear sat on the pavement, partially covered by the snow. 2 bags on top of the pile looked intact, stuffed, zipped shut, untouched by whatever had torn through the rest of the camp. 3 zombies were within 20 yards of the tents. The nearest was about 15 feet from the gear pile, standing with its back to her, swaying slightly. The second was shuffling in a slow arc around the far tent. The third was further out, maybe 30 feet away, facing the center of the lot. Riley pulled one of the rocks from her pocket. She needed the first throw to go wide, far enough left to pull all three of them, without pulling the ones further into the lot. She lined up the angle and threw. The rock arced over the top of the sedan and came down somewhere on the pavement to the left, bouncing off a piece of gear with a sharp clack before rolling to a stop. All three of the close zombies turned toward the sound. She pulled another rock and threw it. This one went a little further, landing near the side of a collapsed tent, making a muffled thump as it hit the canvas. The zombies started to move. All three of them began shuffling toward the noise, their bodies pivoting in that slow, uncoordinated way they had. Arms coming up, heads tilting forward, not fast, but committed. They were all heading away from the gear pile. Riley waited. No other zombies came from deeper in the lot. The rest of the dead were either too far from the sound to hear it, or too distracted by whatever they had been doing before. She gave the three a full 15 seconds to get clear of the gear, then she stood up and put her hands on the hood of the sedan. She climbed up over the hood quietly, rolling herself onto the pavement on the other side and crouching low. The cold metal bit through her gloves. Her boots made a soft crunch when they hit the pavement, but nothing that carried. She straightened up, kept the bow ready in her left hand, and moved toward the pile of gear. 10 yards felt like a mile. Every step brought her deeper into the exposed ground between the barrier and the tents, with no cover between herself and the nearest zombies. If any of the three turned back now, she would be standing in the open. She kept her eyes moving, checking the shapes drifting deeper in the lot, making sure none of them were pivoting in her direction. She reached the gear pile and knelt. The two bags on top were a backpack and a duffel. She tested the weight of each. The backpack was heavier than it looked. The duffel was lighter but bulkier. She looped the backpack strap over her shoulder, picked up the duffel by its handle, and turned back toward the sedan. That was when her boot caught on a tent stake, half buried in the snow. The kind of cheap aluminum stake someone had driven into a crack in the pavement and then abandoned. Her boot hooked it and dragged, and she stumbled forward 2 steps, the duffel bag swinging out and clanging against a metal cook pot that was sitting in the snow. The pot rang like a bell, not loud, but loud enough. Heads turned across the lot. She saw it happen in her peripheral vision before she could even straighten up. 4 or 5 zombies shifting direction, their heads swiveling toward her, their bodies starting to pivot, none of them close. But a couple of the ones she had baited with the rocks had stopped moving and were turning back. Riley didn't waste time looking. She took the 2 steps to the sedan, tossed the duffel over the hood, onto the snow outside the barrier, and threw the backpack after it. Then she climbed up after them, sliding across the hood on her stomach, rolling off the far side and landing hard in the snow. She scooped up both bags and ran. The tree line was 10 yards away. She hit it and kept going, pushing between the pines, putting trunks between herself and the lot. She made it another 20 yards in before she dropped to one knee behind a wide oak and looked back. The zombies at the gap had reached the sedan. 2 of them were pressed up against the outside of the car, their arms reaching over the hood, their heads turning side to side as they searched for what had made the noise. But they weren't coming through the gap. They didn't have the sense to climb the hood. After a few seconds, they started to drift away, pulled back toward the center of the lot by whatever had their attention next. Riley let out a long, slow breath. She pulled the backpack onto her lap and unzipped the main compartment. A stale smell rose out of it immediately. She dug through the contents: a wool sweater, a pair of jeans, 2 pairs of socks, still clean, a paperback Bible with a cracked spine, a toothbrush and a small tube of toothpaste, a leather wallet, empty except for a driver's license and a family photo with the corners bent. No medicine. She set it aside and opened the duffel. More clothing: a jacket, a flannel shirt, thermal underwear, a pair of boots too small for her, a Ziploc bag full of hair ties and a hairbrush, a romance novel, and a half-eaten package of cough drops. No medicine. Not a single pill bottle. Not a single blister pack. Nothing. Riley leaned back against the oak and stared up at the dark canopy above her. "How did none of you people think to bring medicine?" she said quietly. She shook her head and zipped the duffel bag closed. She could feel the anger rising in her chest, the frustration of the day pushing against the fatigue, and she had to close her eyes for a second and breathe it back down. Every person who set up here had brought something with them. Some of them had to have brought antibiotics. Some of them had to have brought painkillers, fever reducers, anything. The supplies were here somewhere. She just hadn't found them yet. She pushed the bags up against the base of the oak, covering them lightly with snow. She could come back for them if she needed to. She needed to keep moving. She was getting ready to stand up when she heard the gunshot. A single crack, sharp and clear through the trees, coming from the east. The direction of the path, closer than the 3 from earlier. Then another shot. Then a third. Riley froze where she was, listening. Through the gaps in the trees, she saw movement at the west edge of the lot. 4, maybe 5 zombies were peeling away from the barrier and shuffling toward the east side of the camp, drawn by the sound of the gunfire. They moved in a slow, uneven cluster, their moans layering together as they pushed across the pavement toward the path. The west edge of the lot was emptying out. Riley watched them go. A slow smile pulled at the corner of her mouth, tight and humorless. "Thanks for the distraction," she said. She stood up, checked the bow, and started moving along the tree line to the west. The west edge of the camp would be thinner now. More gear to search, more tents to check. The shooter, whoever they were, was giving her a window, and she wasn't going to waste it. Chapter 5. Riley reached the west edge of the lot and pressed herself against the side of a pickup truck that had been wedged into the barrier. The moonlight was holding, the gap in the clouds drifting slowly, but still wide enough to wash the parking lot in pale silver light. She could see the layout of this section clearly now. A row of tents along the inside of the barrier, most of them collapsed. Gear scattered across the pavement between them, bags, tarps, and coolers, all of it dusted with a thin layer of snow that caught the moonlight and made everything glow faintly. 2 zombies were still close to the barrier on this side. The rest had been pulled east by the gunshots, but these 2 hadn't followed. One of them was standing beside a collapsed tent about 15 yards in, swaying in place, its head tilted forward like it was staring at the ground. The other was further along the barrier, maybe 20 yards from the first, shuffling in a slow circle around a pile of gear like it had forgotten what had brought it there. Riley moved along the outside of the barrier until she found a gap between 2 cars wide enough to see through. She set an arrow against the string, drew back, and sighted on the closer zombie. Clean angle, no obstructions, the moonlight giving her enough light to place the pin exactly where she wanted it. She released and the arrow caught it in the side of the head. It dropped without a sound, folding onto the pavement in a heap. The second one turned at the noise of the body hitting the ground, its head swiveling, searching for the source. Riley already had the next arrow knocked. She drew, waited for it to stop moving, and put the arrow through its forehead. It went down backward, arms splaying out as it landed, the back of its skull bouncing off the pavement with a dull crack. Riley climbed over the hood of the nearest car and dropped down into the lot. She moved quickly to the first body, pulled the arrow free, wiped the broadhead on the zombie's coat, and crossed to the second to do the same. Both were clean kills, the shafts undamaged. She slid them back into the quiver and turned her attention to the gear. She started with the nearest pile. A large hiking pack sat on the pavement, the kind with the external frame and the waist belt. The fabric faded from weeks of exposure. She unzipped the main compartment and dug through it. A sleeping bag liner rolled up tight, 2 pairs of thermal socks, a tin cup, and a folding fork. A bag of trail mix, still sealed. She pocketed the trail mix and kept going. The side pockets held a compass she didn't need, a roll of paracord, and a small sewing kit. No medicine, not a single pill bottle. The next bag was a smaller day pack, half buried under the canvas of a collapsed tent. She pulled it free and went through the contents. More clothing, a flannel shirt, a beanie cap, a pair of gloves with the fingers worn through, a can of beans, and a pack of beef jerky in the bottom. She took both and stuffed them into her backpack. The weight was adding up, but food was food, and she didn't know how long this trip was going to take. Still, no pill bottles, no blister packs, nothing that would bring her mother's fever down. She moved down the line, checking every bag and container she could reach. A duffel with nothing but dirty laundry shoved inside, the smell hitting her even in the cold air. A plastic bin with cooking supplies, a camp stove, a box of waterproof matches, a a set of aluminum pots nested together, a garbage bag tied shut that turned out to be full of wet towels, frozen stiff. Every search came up the same. Food she could use, and she took what she found. But the one thing she had walked 10 miles to find wasn't in any of them. She was starting to wonder if these people had brought anything useful at all, or if they had left their homes in the same kind of panic her family had, grabbing whatever was closest and running without thinking about what they might need a week later. She straightened up and scanned the lot ahead of her. About 30 yards further along the west edge, closer to the northwest corner of the barrier, another cluster of bags sat on the pavement near a pair of standing tents. 3 zombies were in the area, shuffling between the tents in slow, overlapping loops. They were close together, all within a 10-yard stretch, and the bags were right in the middle of them. "Damn it, I don't have a choice," she said under her breath. She moved forward along the barrier, keeping low, using the cars for cover. When she was directly across from the cluster, she stopped and studied the 3 zombies. She needed clean shots, quick, precise, no misses. The pavement under the snow meant a missed arrow could skip off the asphalt and disappear, and she couldn't afford to lose any more. She had been careful all day, retrieving every shaft she could find after every fight, but the count was still lower than she wanted it to be. Her boots made soft sounds on the snow-covered pavement, each step deliberate, heel first, rolling forward to the toe, the way her father had taught her to walk when they were stalking deer. 20 yards, 15. She stopped at 10 and raised the bow. The closest zombie had its back to her, standing in front of the nearest tent with its arms hanging at its sides. She drew, settled the pin on the back of its skull, and released. The arrow punched through, and the zombie pitched forward, hitting the pavement face first. The second one turned. Riley already had the next arrow ready. She drew and put it through the creature's temple before it had finished pivoting toward her. It dropped sideways, its shoulder hitting the ground first, the rest of its body following in a slow collapse. The third was further out, near the second tent, and it was coming now, arms up, mouth open, that low moan building in its throat. Riley knocked, drew, and waited 1 extra second for it to close the gap to 8 yards. She released and the arrow hit dead center in the forehead. The zombie dropped to its knees, then fell sideways against the tent pole, pulling the canvas down on top of itself as it went. Riley retrieved all 3 arrows, checking each shaft for damage before sliding them back into the quiver. She knelt beside the first cluster of bags and started going through them. The first one was promising. A large backpack with multiple compartments, well packed, the kind of bag someone had put thought into before leaving home. She opened the main compartment and found canned food, a water filter, fire-starting supplies, a change of clothes rolled tight. The side pocket had a first aid kit. She pulled it open and found bandages, antiseptic wipes, a small tube of antibiotic ointment, and a bottle of aspirin. She took the aspirin and the first aid kit, but kept searching. Aspirin wasn't what her mother needed. It might help with the fever, but it wasn't going to fight whatever infection was burning through her. She was halfway through the second bag when the gunshot made her flinch. Close. Much closer than the earlier ones. The sound cracked through the lot without the muffling layer of trees to soften it, sharp enough that she felt it in her chest. She looked up toward the eastern path and saw a zombie falling, its body crumpling to the pavement at the entrance to the gap between the 2 pickup trucks. The last one standing near the path, and someone had just dropped it. Her heart rate spiked. Whoever was doing the shooting was close and getting closer. She needed to finish and be gone before they came through that path and into the lot. One more bag, she whispered. She grabbed the third bag and yanked the zipper open, shoving her hand inside, feeling for bottles, for anything hard and plastic that might be what she needed. Her fingers closed around clothing, a book, something metal that felt like a flashlight. She was pulling items out and tossing them aside when the voice hit her from across the lot. "Who in the hell are you?" Riley's head snapped up. 3 people were standing at the edge of the eastern path, maybe 40 yards away, walking toward her. 2 men and a woman, all of them armed. The lead man was tall and lean, with a beard that had grown past the point of being kept up. The second man was shorter, stockier, wearing a heavy coat with the collar turned up against the cold. The woman was between them, a step behind, holding what looked like a bat or a length of pipe. The lead man was holding a revolver, the The barrel pointed directly at Riley. She could see the moonlight reflecting off the metal. Riley stood up slowly, raising her hands. The bow was still in her right hand, hanging loose, the string facing outward. She kept her fingers open and visible. Her mind was racing, running through options that all ended badly. She was 40 yards from 3 people, one of whom had a gun pointed at her. Running meant turning her back on a loaded weapon. Fighting meant bringing a bow to a gunfight at close range. The only move she had was to talk. "Please, I just need medicine," she said. The man with the revolver pulled the hammer back. The click carried across the lot, and Riley felt her whole body tense. Her stomach dropped, and she had to fight the urge to step backward. "I'm only going to ask you one more time," the man said. "Who in the hell are you?" "My name is Riley. I live south of here. My mother is incredibly sick and I need medicine. Please, I don't want any trouble." The man kept the gun trained on her. He glanced over his shoulder at the other two. The woman stepped forward. "I'm Mandy," she said. "That's Brian, and the gun enthusiast is Kevin." "It's nice to meet you," Riley said. "Please, do you have any medicine?" Mandy looked back at the others. Brian stepped up beside her. "We might have something for you, but I gotta say, it's kind of rude for you to come in here and start taking stuff," Brian said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. I just didn't know anybody was here." The 3 of them chuckled. Kevin brandished the revolver, tilting it slightly in his grip. "Really? You didn't hear this bad boy going off?" Kevin said. "You're not deaf, are you?" "No, you couldn't be. Because if you were, then you wouldn't be talking to us right now, would you?" Riley didn't have a response. She knew she was in the wrong. She had heard the gunshots and come anyway, had climbed the barrier and started going through bags that didn't belong to her. There wasn't a good way to spin that. "Please, I have food I can trade for it," she said. "Some dried beans, and I even have some chocolate bars. I just need 1 bottle of cold medicine. We can trade and I'll be on my way." The 3 of them looked at each other, exchanging glances that Riley couldn't read in the low light. Brian tilted his head. "I don't know. What do you think?" Brian said. Kevin extended the revolver, straightening his arm and leveling the barrel at Riley's chest. "I think we just take her stuff." Chapter 6. Kevin pulled the trigger. The hammer fell on an empty chamber with a dry, metallic click that echoed across the lot. For half a second, nobody moved. Kevin looked down at the revolver in his hand, his face twisting with confusion, like the weapon had betrayed him in front of company. Brian and Mandy both flinched at the sound, their bodies tensing for a gunshot that never came. Riley didn't wait for him to figure it out. Her hands moved before her brain had finished processing what had happened. The bow came up, the arrow she had been holding loose against the string snapping into position. She drew back in one fluid motion, the string biting into her fingers through the gloves, and released. The arrow covered the 40 yards between them in less than a second and buried itself in Kevin's right shoulder, just below the collarbone. The impact spun him sideways, and the revolver tumbled out of his hand, clattering across the pavement. Kevin screamed. It was a raw animal sound that ripped through the quiet of the lot and bounced off the car barrier. He grabbed at the arrow shaft with his left hand, his fingers wrapping around the wood, his face contorted. Riley was already running. She sprinted for the west edge of the barrier, her boots pounding the snow-covered pavement, the backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Behind her, she could hear Brian shouting something, and Mandy's footsteps starting up. She reached the barrier and threw herself at the hood of the nearest car, sliding across the metal on her stomach and dropping off the far side into the snow. She hit the ground hard, scrambled to her feet, and ran for the tree line. The woods were 10 yards away. She cleared the gap in seconds and crashed through the first row of pines, branches scraping against her jacket and the quiver on her back. She kept going, pushing deeper, putting trees between herself and the lot. Behind her, the voices carried through the cold air. "That bitch is going to pay." Kevin's voice thick with pain and rage. She heard the sound of the arrow shaft snapping, followed by a grunt and a string of curses. Then the distinct click of a cylinder opening, followed by the rattle of bullets being fed into chambers. He was reloading. Riley pushed harder. The moonlight that had been helping her all evening was failing now, the clouds sliding back across the gap, cutting the light down to almost nothing. The trees around her went from silver outlines to dark shapes, then to nothing at all. She was running blind, her hands out in front of her, feeling for trunks and branches, her feet punching through the snow with every step. She could hear them behind her, 3 sets of footsteps crashing through the woods, not trying to be quiet, not needing to be. They knew she was ahead of them, and they knew she couldn't run forever. The sounds spread out as they moved, fanning into a loose line, trying to cut off her angles. Riley slowed down. Running in the dark was going to get her killed faster than the people behind her would. A tree root, a hidden rock, a drop she couldn't see, any of it would put her on the ground, and then it would be over. She dropped her pace to a fast walk, then slower, letting her feet feel the terrain before committing her weight. The bow was useless now. She couldn't see well enough to aim, couldn't judge distance, couldn't tell the difference between a person and a tree trunk at 20 yards. She reached down to her hip and pulled the hunting knife from its sheath. The footsteps behind her had slowed too. They were still coming, but more carefully now, the crashing replaced by the crunch of deliberate steps through snow. They were close, maybe 30 yards back, spread out in a loose line, moving through the trees on either side of her trail. Riley angled left and pressed her back against a thick oak. She held the knife close to her body, the blade pointed down, and made herself breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, quiet enough that the sound wouldn't carry. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, the adrenaline making her hands shake. She squeezed the knife handle tighter and waited. Footsteps. Coming from her right, circling the tree she was using for cover. Heavy steps, confident. Someone who thought they knew where she was. A shape came around the trunk, close enough that she could make out the outline of a shoulder and an arm reaching forward in the dark. Riley slashed with the knife. The blade caught him across the hand, the edge biting into the meat between his thumb and forefinger. Brian yelled and jerked backward, pulling the hand against his chest. Riley stepped in and shoved him hard in the center of his chest with both hands. He was off balance from the cut, his weight already shifting backward, and the push sent him down. He hit the snow on his back, the air leaving his lungs in a grunt. She didn't stay to finish it. She turned and ran, heading deeper into the woods, leaving Brian on the ground behind her. The snow grabbed at her boots with every step, slowing her down, making her fight for every yard. She could feel the cold biting through the sweat on her back, the adrenaline keeping the worst of it at bay, but not for much longer. "Over here!" Brian shouted. "She cut me. She's heading west." Footsteps converged behind her. Mandy's voice closer than Riley expected, calling out to Brian as she ran toward his position. Riley used the noise to cover her own movement, pushing through a thicket of young pines, the branches whipping across her face and arms as she forced her way through. A branch caught the quiver strap and yanked it sideways, pulling her off balance for a second before it snapped free. She came out the other side and kept moving, her lungs burning, the cold air cutting into her throat with every breath. She needed to think. Running wasn't going to work. They were 3 people, and she was 1, and they knew these woods better than she did. If she kept running in a straight line, they would fan out, flank her, and close the gap from the sides. Kevin had a loaded revolver now, and even in the dark, a lucky shot at close range would end this. She needed something that would slow them down, buy her time, change the math in her favor. The clouds shifted. A thin sliver of moonlight broke through, just enough to turn the world from black to dark gray. Riley could see the outlines of trees again, the pale snow on the ground, the shapes of the forest around her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to move without running into things. It was also enough to see the zombie. It was standing between 2 pines about 15 yards ahead, facing away from her, its body swaying slightly. One of the slow ones, drawn out of wherever it had been by the noise of the chase. It hadn't noticed her yet. It was just standing there, waiting for something to give it a direction. Riley slowed to a walk and circled behind it. She came up close enough to smell the decay coming off its clothes, close enough to see the matted hair on the back of its head. She raised the knife and drove the blade into the middle of its back, sinking it in deep enough to get a solid grip on the handle, but angling the point away from the spine. She didn't want to kill it. She needed it alive, or whatever passed for alive with these things. The zombie lurched forward at the impact, its arms swinging out, a moan rising from its throat. Riley kept her grip on the knife handle, using it like a rudder, steering the creature in front of her. It tried to turn, tried to reach back for whatever was causing the pain it couldn't feel, but she kept it facing forward, walking behind it, the knife buried in its back, acting as a handle that let her control its direction. She could hear Mandy coming through the trees, fast footsteps, branches breaking, the sound of someone moving with anger rather than caution. The footsteps were getting closer, coming from the right, heading straight toward the noise the zombie was making. Riley positioned the zombie between herself and the sound and waited. Mandy came around a thick pine at a near run, the pipe raised in both hands, ready to swing. She saw the shape in front of her, and her momentum carried her forward before her brain could tell her legs to stop. Riley shoved the zombie hard, driving it forward with everything she had, and let go of the knife. The zombie crashed into Mandy chest first. Its arms wrapped around her on impact, the instinct to grab overriding everything else, and both of them went to the ground. Mandy landed on her back with the zombie on top of her, its weight pinning her down, its face inches from hers. Its mouth opened and the teeth snapped at the air above her nose. Mandy got her hands up, pressing them into the creature's chest and neck, pushing its head back just far enough to keep the teeth from reaching her. Her arms were shaking with the effort. "Help me!" Mandy screamed. "Help me!" Riley stood over the two of them, looking down. The zombie was thrashing on top of Mandy, its body writhing, its hands clawing at her jacket. Mandy's face was twisted with panic, her teeth clenched, every muscle in her arms straining to keep the thing's mouth away from her. "You shouldn't have been greedy, bitch," Riley said. She heard the others crashing through the woods, getting closer. Brian's voice calling out Mandy's name, Kevin's heavier footsteps somewhere behind him, both of them converging on the screaming. Riley pulled the knife from the zombie's back, wiped the blade on her pant leg, and turned away. She ran into the darkness, heading north, putting as much distance between herself and the three of them as she could. The snow was deep and her legs were heavy, the exhaustion of the day catching up with her in waves that made her thighs feel like they were filled with concrete. But the screaming behind her was all the motivation she needed. She pushed through it, weaving between trees, ducking under low branches, letting the darkness swallow her. Behind her, Mandy's voice went higher, more desperate, the zombies moaning layering underneath it. Brian reached them first. He grabbed the zombie by the collar of its jacket and hauled it backward, dragging it off Mandy with a grunt of effort. Kevin was right behind him, his injured shoulder held tight against his body, his left hand gripping the reloaded revolver. Brian threw the zombie to the ground and stepped back. Mandy was on her feet before it could get up, the pipe already in her hands. She brought it down on the creature's skull with a crack that echoed through the trees. Then again. Then a third time, until the thing stopped moving. Mandy stood over the body, breathing hard, the pipe dripping in her hand. Her coat was torn where the zombie had clawed at her. Her face was scratched and her hair was matted with snow and dirt. "Are you okay?" Kevin asked. Mandy looked up. Her eyes were wide, her chest heaving. She stared into the dark woods where Riley had disappeared, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles in her neck were standing out. "Let's hunt her down," Mandy said. "I'm going to make her pay for that." Chapter 7. Riley ran hard through the trees, her boots breaking through the crust with every stride, the sound of it filling the woods around her. She could hear the three of them somewhere behind her, not close, but not far enough, their voices cutting through the cold air as they pushed after her. The clouds had drifted further apart since the fight, and the moonlight was growing stronger, washing the snow in pale blue light that made the shadows between the trees sharper and the open ground brighter. It helped her see, but it helped them see too. Two zombies appeared ahead, shambling out of a stand of birch trees about 20 yards up. They had heard her coming and were turning toward the noise, their arms rising, their moans starting to build. Riley didn't slow down. She angled toward the first one and pulled the knife from her hip as she closed the distance. She hit it at a near run, driving the blade into the side of its skull and letting her momentum carry her past. The zombie's legs folded and it went down, the knife pulling free as she moved. She stopped and turned, breathing hard, the knife dripping in her hand. The second zombie was still coming, shuffling toward her through the snow, maybe 10 yards out. Behind it, through the trees, she could see her own footprints cutting a clear trail through the moonlit snow. Every step she had taken since leaving the parking lot was stamped into the white surface, a perfect path that anyone could follow. The snow had stopped falling hours ago. Nothing was going to fill those prints in. Nothing was going to hide where she had been. "I gotta do something to slow them down," she said. The second zombie moaned. It was close now, 8 yards, arms reaching, mouth open. Riley looked at it, and the idea came together fast. She didn't kill it. Instead, she darted around its left side, staying just outside its reach, and dropped low. She drove the knife into the back of its right knee. The blade cut through the decayed tissue, and the joint buckled. The zombie tipped forward, its balance gone, and went face first into the snow. Riley stepped in and stabbed the back of the left knee before it could try to push itself up. Then she went back to the right leg and drove the blade in again, sawing through whatever was still holding the joint together. She did the same to the left. The zombie's legs went slack beneath it, useless, the muscles and tendons severed beyond anything that could support weight. It tried to crawl. Its arms dug into the snow, pulling its body forward an inch at a time, its head turning side to side as it searched for her. The moaning continued, low and constant, but the thing wasn't going anywhere fast. It was stuck in the middle of her trail, right in the path anyone following her footprints would have to walk through. She could hear the others in the distance crashing through the woods, their voices rising as they found her tracks and picked up the pace. She could hear more moaning too, coming from other directions, drawn by all the noise. The woods were waking up around her. Riley dropped to her knees and scooped armfuls of snow onto the zombie's body, packing it down over its back and legs, covering the dark shape against the white ground. She worked fast, her gloves pushing the powder into the gaps, smoothing the surface, trying to make the mound look natural. The creature kept trying to crawl, its arms still working beneath the snow, the movement causing small ripples across the surface. But the fresh powder settled over it and broke up its outline. In the moonlight, from 20 yards away, it would look like just another drift, a bump in the snow beside a tree, nothing worth paying attention to, until someone walked into it and felt hands close around their ankle. She stood up, wiped the knife on her pant leg, and ran. She made it maybe 40 yards deeper into the woods before the gunshot split the air behind her. Bark exploded off the tree to her right, inches from her head, splinters peppering the side of her face. Riley threw herself behind the trunk and pressed flat against the bark. "I see you!" Kevin shouted. Riley's heart was slamming against her ribs. She could feel the splinters stinging her cheek where they had hit. She sucked in a breath and shouted back, "Then come and get me, asshole!" She stepped out from behind the tree just long enough to raise the bow, draw, and send an arrow toward the shapes in the trees behind her. The shot was fast and unsteady, and the arrow sailed past Kevin's head, disappearing into the dark woods beyond. She ducked back behind the trunk as Kevin fired again. The bullet hit the tree she was hiding behind, the impact sending a vibration through the bark that she felt in her shoulder blades. Riley moved. She broke from cover and ran deeper into the woods, weaving between trunks, keeping the trees between herself and the gunfire. Behind her, she could hear the three of them pushing forward, following her trail, Kevin's voice barking directions to the other two. Then Brian screamed. It was a raw, startled sound, the kind of yell that came from something unexpected. Riley stopped behind a thick pine and looked back. She couldn't see clearly through the trees, but she could hear the struggle. Brian was on the ground, thrashing, and the zombie she had buried in the snow was on him, its hands gripping his leg, its teeth snapping at his jeans. She could hear the fabric tearing as the creature tried to bite through it, its mouth working against the denim. Kevin's revolver cracked, and the zombie went limp. Brian scrambled backward through the snow, kicking the dead thing off his leg and getting to his feet. He was shouting, his voice shaking. While they were looking down, Riley stepped out from behind the pine and drew the bow. She sighted on Mandy's leg, the shape of her body visible in a gap between the trees about 30 yards back, and released. The arrow hit Mandy in the thigh, and she went down screaming, her hands going to the shaft, her body crumpling sideways into the snow. Kevin spun and fired twice in Riley's direction. Both shots hit trees, the impacts sending bursts of bark into the air. Riley was already behind cover, already moving, circling through the woods to the right. She moved quietly now, placing each step with care, the way her father had taught her when they stalked deer through these same kinds of woods. Heel down first, rolling forward, testing the ground before committing her weight. The moonlight helped. She could see the three of them through the gaps in the trees, gathered together in a loose cluster. Kevin standing over Mandy with the revolver sweeping back and forth across the dark forest. Brian was beside him, limping slightly, his hand still pressed against the leg where the zombie had grabbed him. They were scared. She could see it in the way they moved, the way they kept turning in circles, the way Kevin's gun hand was shaking. They had come into these woods expecting to chase down one woman with a bow. They hadn't expected her to fight back like this. They hadn't expected to be the ones bleeding. Riley kept circling, moving from tree to tree in a wide arc, keeping the three of them in sight while staying deep enough in the shadows that they couldn't see her. She counted the shots in her head. Kevin had fired one at her when she ran, one more that hit the tree she was behind, one to save Brian from the zombie, two more just now. 5 rounds out of 6, one left. "Where the hell is she?" Brian said. Kevin didn't answer. He was turning in a slow circle, the gun extended, his eyes searching the shadows. Then he stopped moving. Riley watched his posture change, watched his shoulders tighten. He had heard it too. The moaning was everywhere. It came from every direction at once, a chorus of low, overlapping voices drifting through the trees. The gunshots had done their work. Every zombie within earshot was converging on their position, drawn by the cracks of the revolver, and the sound of them was getting louder by the second. "You hear that?" Riley called out from the darkness. "It looks like you have some fans." "They're just as dangerous to you as they are to us," Kevin said. A moment later, something sailed through the air and landed in the snow at Kevin's feet. A flashlight. It hit the ground with the switch already on, the beam shining straight up into his face, lighting him up like a spotlight in the middle of the dark woods. "Yeah, but now they've seen you," Riley said. "Shut it off! Shut it off!" Kevin said. Brian dropped to his knees and scrambled for the flashlight, his hands clawing through the snow. In his rush, he bumped the arrow in Mandy's leg with his elbow. Mandy screamed, a sharp, ragged sound that cut through the moaning and echoed off the trees. "Quiet! Quiet!" Kevin said. The moaning intensified. The shapes between the trees were getting closer now, dark forms pushing through the snow from every direction, drawn by the light and the screaming and the gunfire. Kevin could see them. Brian could see them. The flashlight was off now, but the damage was done. "You have 2 choices," Riley said. Her voice came from somewhere in the dark, calm and steady, impossible to pin down. "Come at me with the 1 bullet you have left in your gun, or you take your wounded friend and get someplace safe." "Come on, man, forget her," Brian said. "She's got to pay for stealing from us," Kevin said. Mandy whimpered on the ground, her hands pressed against her thigh, trying to stop the blood that was soaking through her pants and dripping into the snow beneath her. "I'm going to die if I can't stop the bleeding," Mandy said. Kevin looked around the woods, trying to spot Riley, but all he could see were the shapes of the dead closing in from every side. The moaning was a wall of sound now, pressing in from the darkness. "Damn it!" Kevin said. He holstered the revolver and reached down with Brian to help Mandy up. They got her to her feet, one on each side, her arms draped over their shoulders, and started moving back toward the camp. Mandy's injured leg dragged through the snow behind her, leaving a dark trail. The 3 of them moved slowly, the 2 men half carrying her, Kevin's injured shoulder making his side of the work harder. They disappeared into the trees heading south, the sound of their footsteps fading. Riley watched them go from behind a wide oak, 50 yards out, hidden in the shadows. She stayed motionless until she couldn't hear them anymore, until the crunch of their footsteps and Mandy's whimpering had faded into nothing. The only sound left was the moaning of the zombies that were still converging on the spot where the flashlight had been, their dark shapes drifting through the trees in the moonlight, searching for the source of all the noise that had already moved on. She leaned her head back against the bark and closed her eyes. Her hands were trembling. Her legs felt hollow beneath her, the adrenaline draining out and leaving nothing behind it but exhaustion and cold. She stayed there for a long moment, breathing, letting the shaking subside, letting the silence settle back over the woods. That was too close. Chapter 8. The woods pressed in around her as she walked. The moonlight came and went, the clouds sliding across the sky in slow, uneven waves that would open up for a minute and then close again, plunging the forest back into near total darkness. Riley kept one hand on the bow and the other stretched out in front of her, feeling for tree trunks and low branches before they could catch her in the face. Her legs were heavy. Every step felt like she was pulling her boots out of wet concrete, the snow dragging at her shins, her thighs burning with a dull ache that had settled in somewhere during the fight and hadn't let go since. She could hear zombies around her, not close, but present. The moaning drifted through the trees from multiple directions, layered and distant, the sound carrying further in the cold air than it would have during the day. She pressed her back against a thick pine and held still as three of them shambled past about 20 yards to her left, their shapes barely visible in the dark, moving in a loose cluster heading south. They passed without turning, without noticing her, their dead eyes pointed at nothing. She waited until the sound of their footsteps had faded before she started moving again. She walked for what felt like a long time, half a mile, maybe more, heading north through the trees with the compass in her hand, checking it every few minutes in the brief windows of moonlight. The terrain was rolling gently, low ridges and shallow valleys filled with deep snow. She was moving slower than she had been all day, her pace cut down to something barely above a crawl by the darkness, the exhaustion and the cold that had worked its way through every layer she was wearing. "What am I going to do?" she said quietly. She stopped and leaned against a tree, rubbing her legs with both hands. The muscles in her thighs and calves were tight, knotted up from hours of walking through snow. Her feet were numb inside her boots. She couldn't feel her toes anymore, just a vague pressure where they pressed against the insoles. She rubbed harder, trying to force some warmth back into the tissue, but the cold had gone too deep. "I need to get warm, and I need to rest," she said. More moaning rose up from behind her, further away than before, but still there, still following the trail of noise that the night's events had laid down through the woods. The dead didn't sleep. They didn't stop. They just kept moving toward whatever had made the last sound they heard, and tonight there had been plenty of sound to go around. "But where?" she said, trailing off. She pushed away from the tree and kept walking. Another half mile of dark forest, another stretch of putting one foot in front of the other through the snow, fighting the urge to sit down and close her eyes. The cold was making her drowsy, the kind of dangerous sleepiness that came when the body started shutting down systems to conserve heat. She recognized it from her father's warnings. He had told her and Harper about hypothermia enough times that she could recite the symptoms from memory: confusion, drowsiness, slurred speech, loss of coordination. She wasn't there yet, but she was on the road. Then she saw it. About 10 feet up in a large oak tree, mounted on the trunk with a ladder bolted to the bark below it, a deer blind sat in the crook of 2 thick branches. It was a simple box structure, plywood walls with narrow viewing slots cut into each side, a hinged door facing the ladder, and a roof that overhung the walls by a few inches. The kind of thing a hunter would sit in for hours waiting for a buck to walk into range. It was small, barely big enough for 2 people sitting down, but it was off the ground, it was enclosed, and it was the best thing she had seen all day. "Thank God," she said. Riley slung the bow over her shoulder and grabbed the bottom rung of the ladder. Her arms protested as she pulled herself up, the muscles in her shoulders and back screaming from the abuse they had taken. She climbed slowly, one rung at a time, until she reached the platform. She pushed the door open and crawled inside, then turned around and pulled the ladder up after her, hauling it through the door and laying it flat across the floor of the blind. Nothing was climbing up after her tonight. She closed the door and latched it, then reached over and pulled the viewing slot covers shut on all 4 sides. The blind went dark, the only light a thin line of moonlight leaking in around the edges of the door. The wind was blocked. The snow was blocked. The temperature inside wasn't warm, but it was noticeably less cold than the open air had been, the plywood walls trapping just enough of her body heat to take the edge off. Riley collapsed into the corner, her back against 2 walls, her legs stretched out in front of her. Every muscle in her body ached. She could feel the exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight, dragging her down into the floor of the blind. She dug through her backpack and pulled out a water bottle and one of the protein bars she had found at the campsite. She tore the wrapper off the bar and ate it in 4 bites, barely chewing, the calories hitting her empty stomach like a fist. She washed it down with water and sat there for a moment, breathing, letting her body absorb something it had been running without for hours. "What the hell am I going to do?" she said. She paused, staring at the dark wall across from her. "The first thing you're going to do is get warm and get some rest, because if you don't, you're not going to survive." She dug through the backpack again, pulling out the small first aid kit she had grabbed from one of the bags at the camp. She opened it and sorted through the contents by feel, her fingers moving over bandages, antiseptic wipes, tape. Then she found them. A pack of hand warmers, 2 of them, sealed in plastic. She pulled one out and tore the packaging open, shaking the pouch until she felt the chemical reaction kick in. The warmth spread across her palm, and she cupped both hands around it, pressing them together, feeling the heat seep into her stiff fingers. "It's better than nothing," she said. After a minute, she slid the warmer under her shirt and tucked it against her chest, pressing it flat so it sat against her skin. The heat radiated outward, spreading across her sternum and up toward her collarbones. It wasn't much, but the contrast against the cold made it feel like a furnace. She closed her eyes and let the warmth work for a few minutes, feeling her breathing slow, feeling the tension in her shoulders start to ease. She finished the water and set the bottle aside. Then she dug through the pack one more time and pulled out the map. She lifted the cover on the nearest viewing slot, just enough to let a sliver of moonlight fall across the paper, and unfolded it on her lap. "Okay, Riley, figure out where you are," she said. She traced her finger along the route she had taken from Chaffee. North through the woods, past the Lawson property, through the miles of forest to Pattison State Park. She estimated her position based on how far she had walked since leaving the camp. A mile north, maybe a little more. She put her finger on the spot and looked at what was around it. "There's got to be some place where I can find medicine," she said. She studied the map, her eyes moving across the terrain markings, the contour lines, the scattered labels. There was nothing. Empty land in every direction. She knew there were houses and cabins scattered through these woods, the kind of places people built when they wanted to get away from everything, but none of them were marked on the map. They could be anywhere, a quarter-mile away or 5 miles away, and she would never know without stumbling across them by accident. You could spend the whole day wandering around and never find one. Mom doesn't have much time, so you need to figure something out. Her eyes drifted further north on the map, past the empty forest, past the scattered lakes and unnamed roads, up to where the paper showed the outline of a town. Superior. She stared at it for a long time, her finger tracing the streets, the blocks, the shape of the town against the southern shore of Lake Superior. "That's risky," she said. She looked at the legend on the bottom of the map and did the math in her head, the scale, the distance from Chaffee to Superior, the distance from where she was now. She ran the numbers twice to make sure. 23 miles from home. She let out a slow breath. "So, even if I get there and find medicine, it's going to take me a full day to get back. If I'm lucky." She stared at the map, trying to think of something else. Some other option, some other plan that didn't involve walking into a town that had been home to nearly 30,000 people before the world fell apart. A town that would be packed with the dead, every street, every building, every corner crawling with them. She thought about the pharmacy she knew had to be there, whether it was still standing, whether there was anything left inside it. It's another day and a half at a minimum, and as big as that city was, there's going to be a lot of those things. The doubt kept pushing at her, the voice in her head that told her it was too far, too dangerous, that she would never make it there and back in one piece. She sat with it for a long time, letting it have its say, turning the map over in her hands. Finally, she let out a sigh. "It's the only option you have. It's Mom's only chance." She let out another sigh, longer this time, and folded the map back up. She slid it into the backpack and zipped the compartment shut. She reached under her shirt and repositioned the hand warmer, pulling it from her chest and pressing it against her lower back where the muscles had been seizing up for the last hour. "Oh yeah, that's nice," she said. Every muscle ached. She gave the deer blind one more look, checking the door latch, the viewing slot covers, making sure everything was shut tight. It wasn't warm inside, not by any stretch, but the walls blocked the wind and held in just enough heat to keep her above the danger line. She could feel the hand warmer working against her lower back, the warmth spreading through the knotted muscles on either side of her spine. She settled into the corner, pulling her knees up, tucking her hands inside her jacket before closing her eyes for the night. At first light, you're moving, she whispered. At first light, you're moving. The end.